Welcome to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. It's Dr. Ben here. Excited to be with you. And this week's episode is pretty special. I don't know why I said this week's episode because we aren't really on a weekly schedule yet. That being said, this episode is indeed very special because we're focusing on something new for a period of time. I'm starting a series around TMS or Tension Myositis Syndrome. And maybe you found this episode because you were searching for some TMS support, or maybe you found this episode just because you're curious about what Dr. Ben has to say. Anyways, regardless of where you are, I'm hoping that this episode meets you with an open mind, curious about really experiencing and finding a deeper sense of peace and confidence, and of course, health and well-being in your life. Because, for those who don't know, you could probably imagine that as a naturopathic doctor, as someone focused on lifestyle medicine, I consume a lot of information. I am continuously learning and taking in new perspectives, new ideas, new approaches. And one thing that I hear I should say, one thing that I have found that is completely deficient in the conversation around naturopathic medicine and natural healing is a clear focus on mindset, on the psychological components to health. I think for sure it's always given some lip service, like, oh yeah, your stress and your state of mind, of course, impacts your health. But usually it's something secondary. Usually the primary thing is focusing on physical things that we can control and change: our nutrition, our lifestyle practices, exposure to sunlight and grounding and sleeping, all these sorts of things that, of course, they matter. But what I'm here arguing for, and hopefully opening your mind to the fact that your state of mind is of utmost importance, it's of principal importance, and all those other things are secondarily important. And this is pretty obvious when we look out in the world and observe people in their natural habitats, or I guess you could say unnatural habitats. People are doing all sorts of things. And really, of course, science tries to draw the connections between what people are doing and their health outcomes. But there's all sorts of anomalies everywhere. I've spent a lot of my career, I guess you could say, focusing on the blue zones. For those who don't know, those are the areas in the world with the longest living, healthiest people on the planet. Those are, I'm not going to list them off to you because there's 7 of them, but you can look up the blue zones and research the blue zones if you haven't learned about that yet. But anyways, there's a big focus on these blue zones and the nutritional habits that they follow, and also some lifestyle factors. Of course, they're more active, get more steps in daily, that sort of thing. And there's kind of like also like, oh yeah, they have, a strong focus on family and relationships. And for sure, that's kind of like, oh yeah, that's there too. But I have, and I'm just speaking for myself, in my experience, in my professional experience, I feel like I have been focusing way too much on the physical determinants of health, the nutrition, the lifestyle, the exercise, all these sorts of things, and not really emphasizing the state of mind, our psychology, my psychology, as much as it needs to be emphasized. And I have been emphasizing and focusing on that in my own world, in my own experience. But I feel like I haven't really been conveying the magnitude of importance that our psychology and our mindset brings to our overall state of health and our body's ability to heal itself. So that's kind of the long-winded introduction to why I'm here, is to finally give credit where credit is due with regard to the importance of state of mind on healing. So that leads us to talk about TMS, Tension Myositis Syndrome. What is it and how? Or I guess I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the how because I'm wanting to keep this more kind of short and pointed in these conversations in this series focusing around TMS. So anyways, TMS, of course, tension myositis syndrome, this phenomenon, these words were strung together first by Dr. John Sarno. He was kind of a pioneer in mind body medicine. And I learned about Dr. Sarno actually, I think, right after he passed away. And I remember I was introduced to his work through the movie, the documentary film that was made about him and his life and his practice called All the Rage. Like rage as in, anger and repressed emotions. And of course, that's kind of Dr. Sarno's thing, is that TMS is a phenomenon that expresses and manifests as a result of repressed or suppressed or unconscious emotions. And anyways, I watched this documentary film that was really brilliantly made. I loved it. And it just was so powerful and true, and it resonated so deeply. And to be honest, the message was something that I already knew. It was something that I already knew and already experienced in my life, in my body, in my being, the multidimensional nature of myself and my healing ability. But of course, there was more white coat energy and science that was put on this phenomenon. And it therefore kind of resonated and landed in a deeper sort of way. Even though I already knew that the principles that were focused and articulated by Dr. Sarno in this film were universally true and resonant with my past experiences. So anyways, if you haven't watched that documentary film, I highly recommend it. Even if you are already familiar with TMS, it's kind of a cool artistic expression of what this phenomenon is. And of course, a tribute to Dr. Sarno. So anyways, that was back in 2018, I believe, just six or so years ago. So that's when I was introduced to TMS. But my story, and I don't want to belabor my story too much, but my story actually began, I guess I would say, when I finished college and I spent a year living abroad in Hungary. I found myself getting sick, and just kind of, this is the really short abbreviated version of the story. I found myself getting sick recurrently with kind of GI stuff, energy stuff. I was just knocked out. Generally on the weekends after I would travel around in Europe, and then I'd come back to my town in Hungary where I was living and working. And I'd feel really, incapacitated. And long story short, I kind of just had this epiphany that it wasn't anything that I was drinking or eating. It wasn't anything that I was doing that was making me sick. I wasn't, catching any sort of bug, if you will. I was simply homesick. I was lonely. I was feeling out of alignment. And that kind of stress, for lack of a better word, right? That's kind of what the experience and phenomenon physiologically is. That stress manifested in these symptoms. And my simple awareness of this fact, the simple insight, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. And that was kind of the narrative, the internal dialogue, if you will. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm totally okay. This situation that I find myself in, yeah, it's difficult, but this too shall pass. There's an end in sight. I'm going to be leaving this place where, it was a fine place, but I just wasn't really in my, pure aligned self in that situation. Anyways, that insight in and of itself was enough to completely heal, completely, I guess you could call this kind of a chronic recurrent thing that I was experiencing. And it was in an instant in the rearview mirror. And not only was it in the rearview mirror, I felt totally empowered and like, oh my gosh, like I'm in control of how I feel. It is how I feel physically, physiologically is not in any way due to external circumstances and things that I'm doing or not doing. And of course, that's true. But that brings us to like, what about all the nutrition? What about all the lifestyle? What about all the lifestyle medicine science and practices that I have spent, I guess you could say, my career mostly up until now focusing on? Even though I had that experience before I went into studying medicine, I was, inspired to be some sort of mind body practitioner, holistic minded, and this sort of thing. I then went to school and got kind of hung up and dove into the weeds with nutritional science and physiology and pathology. And of course, all the things that medical school brings you to focus on. And then it's like, I kind of forgot about the importance and the magnitude of psychology and mindset in our body's self healing capacity. So, anyway, yeah, I got super obsessed with lifestyle medicine, nutrition, these sorts of things, which again, they're very important. Like it's really hard to be optimally healthy when we're eating junk food. It's really hard to be optimally healthy when we are exposed to environmental toxins and when we're dehydrated and when we're not moving and sitting on the couch day in and day out. It's really hard to feel our best if we don't have our lifestyle dialed to some extent. However, having our lifestyle dialed is not going to make up for the fact that we are out of alignment or stressed, I guess, for lack of better terms, in various areas of our life. So anyways, that's what TMS is. It's the manifestation of stress. But I want to talk about really what that stress is and where it comes from, because a lot of people think, okay, stress, I need to mitigate my stress by changing my job, by, making more money, by changing relationships, by, all these outer circumstances that we can do to manage our lives. And therefore, we think we can manage our stress by managing our outer circumstances. But that's simply not the case. Stress is an internal phenomenon. And specifically, the stress that we're talking about in relation and with regard to TMS or tension myositis syndrome is subconscious stress. It's stress that we're not even aware of. So yeah, we might be walking around in our daily life like, oh, I really feel really stressed. I've got, it's the holiday season and I've got all this long to-do list and all these people calling me and, it got so much going on, and that can be stress and that can feel stressful. But that stress, what Dr. Sarno discovered in his practice, that's not the stress that manifests as TMS. The stress that manifests as TMS or tension myositis syndrome, which we'll talk about the symptoms, the specific symptoms of TMS, but the stress that manifests as TMS is more of the subconscious stress. It's the stress that we're totally unaware of, totally not connected with. We can't see it. It's that's why Dr. Sarno uses terms like repressed emotions or unconscious stress and these sorts of things, because they're out of our awareness. And even practices like psychological practices or psychotherapeutic practices, some exist to like bring you back in touch with repressed emotions and past life traumas and things like that. Though even those practices cannot connect us with the stress that Dr. Sarno discovered is really at the cause of TMS. The way I see it, and the way I have felt it, is that stress that does cause TMS is just the normal stress of being a human being in this life. It's the things that, they're so normal. It's the stress that is so normal that we don't even do anything with it. It's just our personality. It's intertwined with who we are. And the cool thing, which we're going to be getting to in later episodes in this series on TMS, the really cool thing about healing from TMS is we don't need to fix our stress. We don't even need to become less stressed to heal from TMS. That is not important or necessary when it comes to healing and transcending this TMS phenomenon. In other words, all we've got to do in order to heal TMS is simply connect the dots. And in connecting the dots, the kind of side effect or byproduct of connecting the dots of what's causing what, naturally there might be a little bit more freedom, a little tension that is released on, throughout our body. But it's simply that awareness and that insight, the same awareness and insight that I had, like I said, in my experience living abroad and feeling out of alignment. Once I connected those dots, it's not like anything profoundly changed. It's not like I started living differently. or thinking differently even. Well, I guess you could say I started thinking a little bit differently, but it was simply connecting those dots and having that insight, having that awareness. And then once we have that insight or awareness, then it is important to maintain that new insight and that new perspective, knowing what is causing what. So TMS is a psychological phenomenon. It is not, the symptoms of TMS are not due to anything physical or physiological. Therefore, there's no amount of nutrition, there's no amount of supplementation, there's no amount of anything physical, any physical treatment or therapy or surgery, even. There's no amount of anything that can heal TMS other than our awareness, our understanding, the insights that we draw. And that's the really cool thing. And also the really difficult thing, because we live in this world where we go to doctors and have tests done, and all of the things that we do and all of the people that we interact with in our pursuit of finding more health and healing and freedom from symptoms, everything is physically focused. Even the holistic alternative natural doctor, quote unquote, like 99% of the time, generally, there are lab tests, there are supplements, there are physically focused therapies. And yeah, like after we get our prescription of this supplement and this nutrition and this lifestyle practice, after we get those sort of physical prescriptions, you could say, then maybe a good doctor might say, yeah, and keep your stress in check. But what all that does is reinforce the idea, the false idea, that our physical symptoms are due to some physical cause. And again, in my professional and personal experience, as well as, studying the work of Dr. Sarno, who of course had a much longer, much deeper, more extensive professional life than I have. He died well into his 90s, and he practiced pretty much up until the day that he died. He observed that 99+% of the time, people's pain and symptoms, and we'll talk about the specifics of those pain and symptoms, but 99% of the time, the pain and symptoms were due to a psychological phenomenon that he called Tension Myositis Syndrome, or TMS. And I want to pause here and kind of shift gears to describe TMS and kind of redefine TMS, I guess you could say, update the description of TMS to meet my standards in 2024, almost 2025. Because again, Tension Myositis Syndrome, long story short, it sounds like a problem. It sounds pathologic, like tension myositis, like that. And let's just unpacking those words. Tension, of course. Myositis is muscle, and situs is inflammation of the muscle. And syndrome is, of course, like a set of symptoms due to the inflammation of muscles as a result of tension. Tension causing inflammation of muscles, causing various symptoms that we classify as a syndrome. That sounds pathologic. It sounds like it's something that we need to fix or understand or treat. But the thing that Dr. Sarno finally got around to discovering later in his life and career, and the thing that I see very clearly, is that this tension myositis syndrome is not pathologic or an issue at all. It's a total, normal, natural, and universal phenomenon that every single human being experiences. Therefore, in my updated, if I were to create an updated definition, I would definitely not use the term syndrome. I definitely actually wouldn't even create any medical lingo or terminology, because that just makes you think and me think that there's something wrong that needs to be fixed. But in fact, tension myositis syndrome is simply an explanation of what's going on in our body. And that's why later in his life, Dr. Sarno used the term MindBody syndrome, or the MindBody syndrome, which again, it's better, but it still has that syndrome word at the end, meaning that it's some set of symptoms that feels pathologic. Like no one wants a syndrome. So anyway, I still use these words. I still use TMS. I still use MindBody syndrome. I still use these kind of medicalized terminologies, but that's just so that I can converse and talk about these sort of things because that's how people have come to learn about these phenomenon. But I want it to be very clear at this point and definitely moving forward that TMS, mind body syndrome, is totally normal, totally natural, totally universal, not a pathology. Nothing's wrong. And just knowing that is healing in and of itself, at least in my experience, because it's good to know that we're good. you know, it doesn't feel good knowing that thinking that there's something wrong, because if we think that there's something wrong, then there's something wrong. And that leads into a whole nother conversation that needs to be unpacked and will be unpacked in a further episode around the nocebo effect. Is like when we're told we've got this, then our thoughts, through the magical, functions that take place in our mind, brain, and translating into the rest of our body, the nocebo effect makes things real. So anyway, I hope that I've done a decent enough job at this point talking about what is TMS and how we can relate to it, think about it. And long story short, if I were to summarize what I wanted to convey, is that TMS is a psychological phenomenon. It's not a syndrome. I don't see it as a syndrome. I don't see it as a problem. It's a psychological phenomenon that explains why we human beings experience the various feelings and symptoms and sensations in our body that we do. And I'll close also by just going a little bit deeper into, and I'll unpack this conversation or this topic maybe in the next episode. I haven't really laid out the sequence of events to talk about this really hugely important and vastly deep subject matter of mind-body medicine. But the question remains, like, why is this phenomenon normal, natural, and universal? Like, why do human beings manifest symptoms physically to deal with or to process emotions or energies that are mental, emotional, and spiritual in nature? And that has to do, and I'll say, just preface this by saying that this is mostly speculation. These are mostly ideas and theories that I don't know if there are really any way to prove or disprove any of these ideas or theories, but they are speculation. But just as is the case with anything, just try this on, just digest it, just sit with it, and see how it resonates. Because for me, it resonates like pure truth. So, anyways, why do we deal with mental, emotional, and spiritual issues, and why do we manifest them physically? The explanation that, again, makes most sense to me is that it's easier in our society, in our culture, in this day and age, it's easier and more socially acceptable to feel physical pain and disturbance than to feel and process and express emotional pain and disturbance. And again, it's not very rational, because I'm sure if you're sitting there listening to this and you're dealing with, back pain or chronic fatigue or other chronic symptoms, and again, we'll talk at a later time about like what the potential symptoms are that could be TMS. But long story short, it can be anything, from digestive to musculoskeletal to other hormonal imbalances. Anything can be due to TMS. So you might be sitting there with your symptoms, experiencing the pain and discomfort, whatever it might be. You might be thinking like, okay, I know that this is TMS. I know that it's a mental, emotional, or spiritual phenomenon. Why can't I just like deal with it in that domain, in my mind, in my emotions? Why can't I just process it? And like, why is it still there? And that is the nature of TMS, is that it's so pervasive. It's so entwined in who we are. And it's so good. The symptoms of TMS are so good at distracting us from the real deep existential issues of our life. It will always find a way to rear its ugly head and to take us away from again, the core root. And that's kind of the paradoxical thing, is it doesn't matter how well we understand and how peaceful we are and how devoted we are to healing ourselves and understanding this phenomenon, it still has a way of manifesting. And that's kind of the way I see it. It's always an invitation to go deeper and to accept more unconditionally, to be more compassionate and loving and patient with ourselves, to be more open-minded and curious. There's always an invitation. TMS always invites us into that deeper understanding of ourselves as a multidimensional being. So long story short, we experience the symptoms of TMS because that's the way that our multidimensional being in our current day and age, that's the way that is safest and most socially acceptable to process and manifest the tension and energies that are stuck, that are repressed, that are suppressed, like whatever the words are, anything that we're having a hard time dealing with mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And again, this is unconscious stuff. If you are conscious of it, it's not an issue. It's unconscious stuff. It's the unconscious stuff that works through us and manifests itself as, again, any number, literally any symptom that you can imagine in your physical body. It can be traced back to the interworkings that we call TMS, or Tension Myositis Syndrome, which again is a normal, natural, non-pathological phenomenon, part and parcel to being human. So long story short here, and just summarizing, there's nothing wrong with you. If you're experiencing the symptoms of TMS, anything, there's nothing wrong with you. And the only thing that you need to do in order to transcend those symptoms is know that. You need to know that there's nothing wrong with you. You need to know that this is just a psychological phenomenon. And a lot of people, think like, okay, so essentially what you're telling me, doc, is that this is just mind over matter. And my answer is, yep, it is mind over matter. However, that sort of, what would you say? That sort of like false, what am I trying to say? This like false dichotomy. I think that's like a term, mind over matter. Like, it's not really like, it's not a mind over matter. It's mind and matter, right? It's like you gotta work it together. But yes, your mind is the most powerful tool in the toolbox of healing. So your mind can do anything. Your mind has manifested the symptoms of dis-ease, and your mind, again, from my perspective, from my understanding and my experience, your mind is the only thing that can truly reverse the symptoms of disease. And we can do a lot of things to kind of manage the symptoms, but your mind is the only thing that can truly reverse the symptoms of disease, because your mind is what played the central role in creating the symptoms of disease. Again, it's not a conscious thing. You wouldn't do that to yourself. It's a completely subconscious thing. So I hope this gives you something to chew on, something to digest, something to contemplate. And the invitation is to traverse and navigate your life with that open-minded curiosity, and hopefully bring a level of acceptance, of compassion, and of patience to everything, especially everything in your world with regard to your body's healing. Because if there's one thing that I could just download and transmit to you, and like make you understand and know, and I think that this would be like the magic pill. The magic pill would be knowing that your body is healing, knowing that there is nothing wrong with you. And one part of, again, just kind of planting seeds for future episodes, one kind of therapy, if you will, in addressing TMS is kind of those affirmations or meditations, because a lot of this manifestation of TMS, a lot of the problem, if you will, is misbelief, is wrong belief systems that need to be updated. And the way to update belief systems is by kind of getting in there, getting in there, where, right? Where do the belief systems, where's the operating system? But we get in there and we change things. We give ourselves an update, a reboot. We need to update our way of thinking to correspond with and align with reality. And most people, their belief systems are in an outdated, delusional reality that's wrong. And even if we know that's wrong, it's still kind of the status quo. And we've got to mindfully and intentionally intervene with our belief system to create an up-level new belief system that's going to be more aligned with health and healing. So here I am finding myself kind of going on and on. I really wanted to stay focused on what is TMS and my experiences with TMS and my kind of updated knowledge and definition of TMS. And hopefully this, again, invites further curiosity and openness to learning more, because I'm really excited to share more about this. And feel free to leave any comments, leave any feedback. And of course, give a like, share this video with someone who might be experiencing something related to tension myositis syndrome. And if you would like to learn more about how I work with people within this paradigm of TMS, you can find the link below. I've got a program called TMS Free Life, and that's kind of a self-paced educational program. But also I am open to doing one-on-one coaching work with people who want to grasp this and understand this to heal. So without further blabber for today, we will catch you guys next time in our next episode series on this TMS series that we're unpacking and going deep to grasp and understand this phenomenon, hopefully empowering you to heal yourself for good and also be that light, that grounded light for good in your community, in your family, because this sort of knowledge, this sort of wisdom, this sort of truth, the way I see it, it's powerful, and we need to spread this because this is the empowerment that our world needs in our health system. We don't need more supplements. We don't need more treatments. We need more truth and empowerment. So peace and love, you guys. I look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast. Bye for now.